Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, I've got a number of people here today, and I'd like to start just with a little bit of housekeeping. If you can remain on mute unless you have a question or a comment, I would welcome those at any time during the presentation. We'll also have a little bit of time at the end for any Q&A that you didn't get out of the way. And I think we got about 14, 15 people joining us today. So thank you all for being here and for spending your lunch hour trying to make your establish an ARC, make it work or function better, or maybe just learn a little bit along the way. So like I was saying, I'm Erik Robinson, and we're going to get started with this sharply dressed gentleman right over here. So a quick agenda of what we're going to be going over today is really, again, the basics of architectural review. What is an ARC committee? How are they formed? Why are they formed? I've got some more kind of little pieces of information that have come up during my experience administering architectural review that I know will come up during any committee's work at some point that we're going to talk about. I'll give some final thoughts, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So we'll start with the real basics here. What is an ARC? You're going to see potentially a number of different acronyms for an ARC, and they all mean the same thing. ARC stands for an Architectural Review Committee. It's also been called a Design Review Committee, an Architectural Design Committee, a Design Control Committee. All these acronyms essentially mean the same thing. And at its very base level, it's a committee of homeowners who are charged with reviewing architectural and or landscaping plans within the community. So whether your community is under development, new homes are being put up, or it's already been developed, it's established, and somebody's doing a remodel, or they're completely altering their landscape in some way, these are the kinds of things that an architectural review committee is going to be put in place for to help assist your community in its goals. Here's an ancient example of architectural review and why a committee is going to be really important to the surface of your community. This is an ancient constructural defect dispute begins with the Leaning Tower of Pizza here. So moving on into why do HOAs establish ARCs? An HOA has a board of directors, and obviously the board is there to enact the policies, enforce the CC&Rs and the rules of the community. But really, the main purpose, all of the things the board does, is to protect the property values, the enjoyment, and kind of the harmony and aesthetics of the community, so that you have consistency in your community regarding what the construction looks like, what repaints look like, how this fence needs to look, and different, all those different items. Excuse me. So the ARC is a tool to achieve, really a very important tool to achieve that #1 goal of a board of directors and a homeowners association, which is protecting everybody's investment in their home and in their community. In the absence of an architectural review committee, you could possibly end up with, I don't know, something like this. Now, these examples we pulled from the internet, obviously a bit of an exaggeration here, although the way that some people call our office and talk about their neighbors' homes, you'd think that they were looking at something like this in one of these photos, but you don't want to end up with something like that, and that's what a board, an association, and an ARC is going to achieve for you. So moving on to, if you've got a board and you don't have an ARC, like how do you put one together? What are the first steps that you're going to want to follow? And of course, like many things that start with that question in a homeowners association, the answer is you're going to want to first go to your community's governing documents. Those are typically going to provide guidance on how your ARC is going to be formed. So who can be a part of it, how many members it needs to have, does it need to have someone from the board? Can someone who's not a homeowner be a voting member of the Architectural Review Committee? And all of those details will likely be contained in your community's governing documents. And I'm going to give you a quick example here, a little snippet of some pretty common language as far as ARCs for this particular community. And it's talking about, again, the improvements shall be commenced, erected, placed, or altered on lots until construction plans and specs showing the nature, et cetera, height, materials, colors, have been submitted to the Design Review Committee. They're going to assure quality of workmanship and materials, harmony of exterior design within the existing improvements and landscaping, as to location with respect to topography and finished grade elevations. It points out what they're not responsible for, determining compliance with structural and building codes, solar ordinances, zoning or other governmental regulations, all of which are the responsibility of the owner. And that's very typical in architectural review committees. They're going to be concerned with the community and the community's rules only, not necessarily what the permitting with the county might have to be, or any of those other details that go through county government regulations. The appointment and removal, you can see down here in 6.2 for this particular committee, which again is talking about the makeup. It can be no fewer than 1 and no more than 5. Usually an odd number is a good choice in case there's any kind of split decision or split vote on any kind of approval or denial. Just like a board, is best to have an odd number. And then it kind of continues on and talks about the declarance rights before a turnover of an architecture review committee, what the terms are, and how they're appointed, which is the board generally appoints an architectural review committee. So who can serve on an ARC? That again is going to be kind of pointed out in your documents, but it's anyone who meets those requirements as laid out in the documents. A lot of times we get questions about, well, do I need to have landscaping, design experience? Do I need to have architectural experience and how to read plans? And how am I going to do this job when I might not know how to read a new construction home plan or a schematic plan, or how to read finished grades and elevations? We're going to get to that in a minute, but our committee members just need to be passionate about their community, have the time to put into the committee. It's probably the most time demanding of any of the committees that are going to be serving the community. And to be fair and to treat everyone equally. And we're going to get to a few more points in the final thoughts about good things that an ARC committee member may have. So that comes down to, well, so I've got my ARC, but what if the committee members don't understand how to read architectural plans? If you go, this is a diagram of a site plan for a new home construction in a community whose ARC I administer. And I just wanted to ask everybody on the call, like, when you look at this, if you zoomed in, would you understand everything going on here? Maybe you would, or maybe you wouldn't, because this includes things like grading, plants, trees that are going to need to be removed, building envelopes, setbacks, a number of different things, lot coverage calculations, elevations, where swales are going to go, and looking at that, someone who is a teacher, or runs an accounting firm, or anything like that, they might look at this and it's going to be like a different language to them. Like, how do I possibly understand or read this? Another example here is, this is an elevation of a new home construction. And again, it's filled with all kinds of architectural details that someone may or may not be able to understand or comprehend. So the question then comes, if you've got an ARC and you've got it formed and you're looking at plans like these and they don't have the expertise to decide if what they're seeing on these plans lines up with what is the requirements within the community for a remodel or a new home construction, then how do you figure out if you can approve or deny, or you need more information, or you can approve with conditions, architectural plans? And that's where consultants come in. Consultants are highly recommended for architectural review committees. Now, who's a consultant? It could be anyone with the knowledge and experience to discern, interpret, and read architectural and landscape design plans. We utilize several architects throughout Central Oregon for some of our architectural review committees, and they're essentially non-voting members of the committee. They serve at the direction of the ARC for specific expertise. And again, they're generally non-voting and they're objective. And that's a really important word when we're talking about architectural review committees, is objectivity. Because even though the ARC may be charged with reviewing plans, they're still going to be living in that community, maybe looking at that new house and that construction or that repaint job or whatever it is. And it's really difficult, I think, to keep any opinions or bias out of an ARC review, and that's really important to do. So consultants add that level of objectivity because they don't have any, skin in the game, if you will. Their job is merely to interpret and compare whatever plans they're provided to any rules or guidelines that your community may have in place as far as architectural review. So I've been talking a lot about when you receive plans, you're going to make sure that they achieve aesthetic harmony and fit into your community. And what does that mean, really? Not having anything specific will certainly bring in a level of subjectivity and inconsistency with your architectural review committee that you want to try and avoid as much as you can. So that's where design guidelines come in. And design guidelines is essentially any documents or language in your community's declaration that provides guidance or rules to the association on what is or is not allowed as far as architecture. These sections in your governing documents can vary greatly in their makeup, in their complexity, and in their detail. Generally, design guidelines are a separate document that the Architectural Review Committee will draft in conjunction with its consultants or with the manager, or they may even be produced by the developer during community development. And this is a separate set of guidelines that takes any requirements from the declaration and kind of transfers them to a set of design guidelines, and then adds in things that community is going to see a lot of. So if your community is built out, maybe your design guidelines are going to be more focused on staining, repainting, and remodeling. So if someone wants to add a pergola or a maintenance storage shed, or wants to repaint their home in a different color scheme, how do you know what's okay and what's not? And how do you keep the subjectivity and the opinions of the ARC committee members about what's going to look good and what's not going to look good out of the equation and treat everybody fairly and equally across the board? And that is really the key to design guidelines, because in the absence of guidelines, it's going to make the work of the ARC pretty difficult, because they're dealing with unclear rules, unclear expectations, and not a lot of guidance for the owners. ARC committee members will change over time. Consultants may change over time. So what one committee thought would achieve aesthetic harmony might not be what another committee feels like will achieve that. So it's really important, if you don't have them, to think about establishing a set of design guidelines. And they don't have to be extremely complicated to start. I'd recommend to start, if you don't have a set, to take any language in your governing documents out, simplify it, interpret it, put it in a separate document, and come up with 4 or 5 other things that your community sees a lot of, and talk about what are our criteria for these things. How high are the fences going to be? How high are they now? Do we ever want to see fences that are higher? What do we want to screen? Are air conditioners and HVAC equipment going to be required to have a screen? Like, these are the kinds of questions that an ARC is going to be thrown or tasked with deciding, and design guidelines are going to make that a whole lot easier for them to figure out. What you're looking at now is a set of, or a table of contents for one of the communities that we manage. These are their design guidelines, and obviously these are long and extremely detailed, and not all of them are this extensive, but just to give everybody an idea of the kinds of things that you may want to think about when you're establishing your design guidelines for your ARC to use during their reviews, is what kinds of meetings are required. Does the ARC want to meet for a pre-design before any designs come down the pipeline? Are there different phases of the design that they're going to have to go through? Building envelope and setbacks, those are important, so you're not putting homes too close to each other. Garages, parking, fences, signage, drainage, and all kinds of things these design guidelines go through. So we've talked about the importance of an ARC, what its function is, where to look to your governing documents on how to form it, who can serve on the ARC. Consider talking about retaining consultants to interpret schematic, design development, architectural plans. Many of our committees have 2 consultants. They'll have a landscape designer on there and an architectural consultant, but none of these people work for free. So the question right here is, well, if we're using these people and we're reviewing plans and we're utilizing our consultants and they're charging $100 an hour for their time, and Aperion as well, generally as part of our contracts, we will administer design review processes, but sometimes there's an extra charge for that as well. So how does management and how do consultants get paid for their work that they do in administering and reviewing the architecture review plans? And that's where you're going to want to think about, alongside the design guidelines, establishing a schedule of fees to ensure that your HOA isn't bearing the burden of paying for an owner to go through the architectural review process. That really should be on the owner. They're the ones who are taking up the time, they're the ones incurring the charges, and they're the ones who are going to get the benefit of an approved plan and an improvement to their home. So I would highly recommend, when you're looking at all this stuff, to think about a review fee, and a lot of our communities also have construction refundable bonds. So they would pay a review fee and a construction bond, whatever everyone felt was fair, in case any common area property is damaged during construction, which can certainly happen. And that's typically refundable, and the review fee I would recommend having it be, just enough to what you think it will take to review the, basic plans. So probably an hour or two of a consultant's time and an hour or two of a manager's time. So $100 to $250, maybe a little bit more, but that's really going to be up to the Architecture Review Committee and the boards of directors on how they're going to charge those fees, what those fees are going to be, and how they're going to be collected. Otherwise, any architecture review requests coming in and utilization of any consultants or any extra charges for management is just going to be bore by all of the members of your association. So the next thing I'd like to kind of touch on when you're forming your ARC and your ARC is reviewing plans is they're going to want to have a really clear, understandable process that they go through to do all of these things. So a few questions that the committee is going to want to ask themselves while they're in development and starting to review plans is, how are those plans going to be provided? Obviously, over the last year and a half-ish now, typically all plans are provided via digital, so that we're minimizing handing off, a bunch of paper. And that's fine, but there are a number of architects that we've worked with or committee members that really prefer to have blueprint-sized plans that they can review. So how are submittals provided? Are they electronic? Are they paper? When and how are they reviewed? So an owner who submits something and wants to line up contractors to put a new roof on their house or repaint their home is really going to want to know, once they submit their materials for review, how long is this review going to take? The documents that we've been talking about a lot, your governing documents, very well may say how long an architectural review committee has to review the plans that are submitted. Usually, I have some committees that are 15 business days, some that are 30 calendar days, but you want to give them enough time, especially if maybe they're not in residence, they're scattered across the country at second homes, or maybe they're just not available for a week to review anything. There's going to want to be a good amount of time built in there for a review committee to do its job. You could also think about, I have a lot of experience down in Sun River, and the SROA Design Review Committee, they just have a regular schedule of meetings. They meet regularly, they have working sessions, and they have deadlines. If you want to get your item reviewed by the committee, it needs to be in by this time, and then it'll be reviewed at this meeting. So you could also think about establishing just a schedule of meetings and cutoff dates for submittals to be reviewed at that meeting. If they miss the cutoff date, then that review would get kicked to the next meeting. That might not be necessary for some communities that don't see a lot of architectural review requests. But larger communities that constantly have requests for that kind of thing coming in may want to consider just establishing a meeting schedule. You're probably also going to want to think about a provision in your design guidelines and your process about extending the review period under some extenuating circumstances potentially. Maybe it's the review is a little contentious. Maybe the committee's never seen anything like it before and they need time to do some research. But a provision in there saying that the committee can extend its timeline in writing for certain circumstances might be something you'd want to think about as well. And the last kind of thing I just want to touch on would be an approval statute. So sometimes people will submit plans and they'll get them approved and they'll decide, you know, I'm going to wait on that work. I don't want to do it this year. I'm going to do it, you know, a year and a half from now. So do the approvals or stand, and for how long? Usually I'd say about a year. Once the ARC has approved something, if a year passes and that improvement hasn't been built, then that person would probably want to go through the architectural review process again in case anything's changed. So this is another snip, just a real example of an approval process procedure that I pulled from a simple architectural review manual for a community that's already all built out. But this one is actually language that's lifted directly from the CCRs and placed in that separate document we've been talking about, that separate design review guideline document. So this just basically says, upon receipt by the committee of an application and plans, it has 21 days in which to review the plans. It talks about how they'll be approved, the sole opinion of the review committee, architectural style and material that's compatible, won't violate any covenant or encroach on any easement or cross-building setback lines, won't result in a reduction of property value, use of enjoyment of the property, and kind of goes on and on. It talks about the improvements will be substantially completed, including all cleanup, within 3 months of the date of commencement, 12 months for the construction of a complete house. So these are the kinds of things that you want to be sure the ARC's aware of and that the applicant, the owner, is aware of, because the last thing I think any community wants is a construction project that goes on for a year that should only take a couple months because of, you know, whatever circumstances happen. So you want some stuff built into here that gives you the ability to go back to an owner and say, hey, it's been 3 months, this pergola or whatever it is was supposed to be built and it's halfway there, and you know, we need to know when this is going to be done and what the status of it is. This last line is why it's really, really important for all architecture review committees to keep very careful track of where they are in the timeline of reviewing their submittals. Because this says if the ACC fails to issue its approval or rejection within 21 days of its receipt of the last of the materials, the ACC approval shall be deemed to have been granted without further action. So if the manager and the committee and everybody loses track of where this review is in the process, and in this case, after 21 days of the submittal being complete, no matter what's going on with that submittal, it's going to be approved per this language right here. So that is not a situation that you want to get in, especially if the review's taking a little bit longer because it's a unique project or something that the committee's never seen before. So other things to consider, and these are just kind of random thoughts, stuff that's come up during my time as an administrator of a number of architectural review committees that you're going to want to consider if you are serving on an ARC, if you're a board of directors who's going to establish an ARC. This stuff is very, very likely going to come up during your tenure of being involved in these kinds of approvals and committees. So this first one says past ARC decisions establish future precedent. So what's always going to happen, if you haven't already experienced this, all you ARC committee members and board members out there, is if you get something under review and the committee's like, you know what, a year or two ago, we altered the guidelines, and this, let's use a hot tub for an example. So say there's a few hot tubs in your community that aren't screened very well. And, you know, a neighbor peers down and sees their neighbors in the hot tub and is like, I don't know that I really want to look at that. And they bring it to the ARC's and the board's attention, and they revise their guidelines, and they say, okay, now we want screening for the hot tubs. We want a 36-inch high wall around the hot tub so it blocks the view, you know, from the neighbors or whomever. The first thing that an owner is going to do is probably look around the community and try and find things that don't follow that rule. So this first one kind of goes hand in hand with the second one, which is grandfathering. So I'm that owner, I want a hot tub. I don't want to build an extra screen that's going to cost me a couple $1,000s. So I go around the community and I see, well, that hot tub doesn't have a screen and that hot tub doesn't have a screen. So why should I have to build one? And again, these two go hand in hand. So when you revise your guidelines as things come up or as decisions are made, and maybe it was a bad decision, maybe the ARC approved a paint scheme that ended up not looking good when it was actually applied to the home. Past decisions of that committee doesn't necessarily mean that the committee is beholden to approve that throughout the future. I'll give you an example. You know, we had a owner who wanted to repaint their home in one of our communities, and they painted a swatch of the color on the home, and it looked okay, and the review committee approved it, and the home got painted. And you know, if you've ever seen a color swatch and then you see that color on an entire house or an entire wall, it can look quite a bit different. And this house ended up looking orange. I mean, it's orange. And nobody anticipated that really. And people in the community were not happy about this orange house. But there wasn't a lot that the committee could do because they had approved it. I mean, the owner did everything they were supposed to when they got their approval. So this is just a good example. That's a good example of past ARC decisions not setting future precedent, because the ARC made a mistake in that case and approved a color scheme that really didn't end up working out. If I'm an owner now and I want an orange house, just because the ARC has approved one before doesn't mean they have to approve it now. They're not beholden to keep making the same mistakes over and over if they make a mistake. And that kind of goes hand in hand with grandfathering. So grandfathering is obviously if there's a change in the design guidelines, you made that mistake and now you want to change the guidelines for hot tub screening or paint schemes or whatever it is. Everything that came before that change in your guidelines and your review process or whatever it is going to be grandfathered in. So you can't, an architecture review committee can't go back to the owners who have hot tubs without screening and say, hey, we decided we need screening in hot tubs now, so you're going to have to build new screens. That's a really good way to get your review committee and your association in a little bit of trouble, because that stuff was approved at the time under those rules. And then once you change the guidelines, anything from that point in the future is beholden to those new guidelines. So what happens when an owner maybe gets a denial and really does not agree with the ARC's decision on a particular matter and says, I want an appeal, I want a hearing, I want to take this up the chain, and I feel that the ARC is wrong in this case, and I have a right to an appeal. And that is certainly something that's going to be built into your governing documents as far as hearing and appeals. So you're going to want to look at your governing documents and take whatever wording is there for hearing and appeals and see how it applies to architectural review, and build that into your set of design guidelines, because during the course of an ARC, that's certainly going to happen. And they're going to take whatever it is up to the board of directors, and the board of directors will hear the appeal and hear the case, and then they'll be able to consider it and make a final decision. Now that one kind of also goes hand in hand with how are ARC members legally protected. Can an owner sue an architectural review committee member because they feel like they weren't fair, they weren't applying the design guidelines correctly to their submittal, kind of whatever it is, and they decide, I'm going to go to the mats and I'm going to hire an attorney and we're going to sue. It can happen, certainly as far as things that happen in a homeowners association. Architectural review is one of the most passionate, I would say. A review committee might just look at something as, this is just another review that I'm going to do for an owner in the community. But for that owner making the submittal, that could be their dream, patio, or their dream, hot tub lounge area, or whatever it is that they've been saving for years and are really looking forward to having. So owners can get very, very, again, passionate about what's going on with their review. So we want to make sure that our architectural review committees are protected, or you're probably not going to get anyone to serve on them. So directors and officers insurance, if you're not familiar with it, protects boards of directors from being individually litigated against, and it also extends to an association's committees. So if you have directors and officers insurance for your association, which I'm sure that all of you do, your ARC committee and its members are also going to be legally protected under that insurance plan from any individual litigation. So if someone's going to sue over an ARC review, they're going to sue the association and not individual members of that committee or the board. The last kind of thing to consider on here as you're doing all this is to appoint a board liaison to your architectural review committee. And that's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Choosing a board member who is going to be copied and provided all of the same information that the architectural review committee is for every submittal. The difference being that they are not going to be a voting member of the committee. They're not going to weigh in with comments on the submittals. They are there to monitor, and they're there so that if something gets out of hand or gets contentious or looks like it's really going to start escalating, that board liaison will have the history, the information, and will have been there from the start of that submittal and can provide that knowledge to the board directly as the liaison, or maybe even can say, if something's really getting out of hand, maybe the board liaison does weigh in with the committee and says, hey, we really don't want this to end up in litigation or as an appeal. What does everyone think about, XYZ? So they're just another layer from the board. Again, not an official member of the committee, not a voting member of the committee, but just more a liaison between the board of directors and the architectural review committee. The ARC is one of the only committees that your community is probably going to form that actually has full autonomous approval powers of things going on within the community. Generally, different committees are going to do research, do work, and bring recommendations to the board. Since the ARC works more autonomously, having a board liaison is a really good practice for your architecture review committee. So just kind of a final thought here before we just open it up to any questions. And I want to really just pound this home with everybody on the line today, is an ARC is established to help owners through this process and to maintain the architectural control of the community, therefore maintaining or even enhancing property values. They are not intended as a roadblock to wish fulfillment. I think a lot of owners have the perception that an architectural review committee is there to tell them, no, you can't do something, because they want to control everything. And that's really not their purpose. They need to be objective. They need to keep their opinions to the side. And they really need to focus on, does this submittal meet our rules and our guidelines? And is it approvable or is it not approvable? They're there to help. So if something isn't going to be approved or approved with conditions, the more information you can give that owner, applicant, regarding the direction that they need to go with their submittal, the better. They really are in a position to help every owner in the community by maintaining this control and by making sure nobody is just going off the reservation, jumping the shark on what it is they want to do to their home, and driving down value of homes around it, and maybe putting up an eyesore for everybody who's going to look at it in the neighborhood for the next, decade or so. Another little comic here. So we got a little over 10 minutes left. I wanted to open it up to anybody to unmute themselves and ask any questions. Sorry about the technical difficulties earlier as I was trying to navigate the lobby and my slideshow at the same time. But are there any questions? It's a lot of information. It's an important committee. And I'm not sure where all of the boards and ARC committee members are with their processes and their establishment, but I'm happy to try and help answer any questions that are out there.
Eric, I have a question. This is Bill Anderson. It's an interesting question that we have with our Architecture Review Committee regarding this idea of previous decisions and grandfathering, et cetera. You phrase this in terms of, if you change the guidelines, you can't go back and impose new guidelines on formerly approved things. We have a situation where, like a lot of guidelines, a lot of communities have, which among other things says that like air conditioning units, HVAC units have to be screened from neighbors and from the street. The situation we have is actually says that in the CC&Rs, and there is also a guideline. The CC&Rs say that it has to be screened according to the Architecture Review Committee. So we have a situation in our community where there are a lot of homes, original homes that were built, that those units were not screened. And since then, and with follow-up committees, most of the new homes that were built were being required to have screening on them. But we have all these units in the community that don't have screens on them. And we're not sure how we proceed with that, because it's required in the CC&Rs. And I don't think that an Architecture Review Committee can waive requirements in the CC&Rs. I think it seems to me that the board could actually enforce those if it's set forth in the CC&Rs. So I'm just wondering what your opinion is at, and how would you deal with something like that?
That's a good one, Bill.
Yeah.
So are the homes that were not screened, were they like some of the first ones built in your community?
They were the early ones built. Yeah, I don't know exactly when all of these were built, but yeah, most of them are the initial homes that were built in the development.
Okay. So, and this is just going to be my opinion, because this is definitely something that would be difficult, and probably, you'd probably get a lot of backlash from owners about.
Yeah,
But if it is in the CCNRs from the original development and a bunch of homes don't have it, and this is not something I think that the ARC would do, I think it's something that the board would do. They could go to those owners, identify all the ones that don't have screens, and explain the situation, give the requirements for a screen, and give a really generous timeline for those homes to put those screens in place. Because that is a different situation than what I was talking about before. The rule was already in place, it just wasn't being followed.
right.
Do you have to do it? No. You don't necessarily have to do that. I think the board could take a position that those were the early homes in the development. The board of directors wasn't in charge at that time. There was no ARC. It was the developer building these homes. He didn't build them with screens. And we're going to grandfather in all those homes without screens and not require them, but we are going to require screens from here on forward. You could even put that in some kind of resolution of the board, so that it's official, that those homes aren't going to be subject to that provision, because those owners probably didn't, they might not have had a choice or known, because those homes were built originally by the developer and didn't follow the documents that the developer themselves drafted.
Yeah.
Right. So which, are you on the board or a committee, Bill?
I'm on both, actually.
Oh, okay.
We have sort of preliminarily discussed this, the Architecture Review Committee has, and we're in the process of discussing how we want to approach this. And we've sort of discussed the idea of maybe the best thing to do would be, like you said, is advising everybody in the community of these requirements and then asking them to voluntarily comply for the benefit of the community, and see what kind of reaction we get out of that. We'll probably get pushback from some people that don't want to spend the money, but we might get some compliance also. And it's
that could be a really good way to do it, Bill. So you telling them they have to and spend that money for something that wasn't probably not really their fault, you would definitely get some backlash. But
yeah.
seeking voluntary compliance, and seeing who's down for that, could be a good way to start.
Yeah.
But that's a tricky one.
Yeah, some of the backlash that we've gotten suggests that people say that, well, the home was approved at the end of construction without that. So that approval is a waiver of anything else at this point. They're saying that since you approved it and you didn't enforce that, then you can't come back and enforce it now. And I'm a retired lawyer, and I think I would be making that argument if I represented the homeowner. And so there is that. The other thing that's related to this question is, committees change. We've had turnover in our committee. We have several new people in our committee. And prior committees make mistakes. You miss stuff. And if you didn't enforce something that should have been enforced, does that preclude the next committee to say, well, wait a minute, that should have been required? And that gets into the whole thing again: is grandfathered? Is it waived? Is it,
Yes, that definitely goes back to that question. And I think you're right, Bill. Our committees change, and they are full of people, and people
Yes.
make mistakes, and people overlook things. So my answer, without getting into any details, is if the committee overlooked something, made a mistake, they could, you know, with that owner, go back and, like you were just saying, they could ask for, you know, we made this mistake. Would you voluntarily comply with whatever it is that we missed? And they could say no, in which case I think at that point the ARC would probably move on. And anytime that would come up in the future, could, you know, certainly either if it needs to be a revision in the guidelines or something, or it's just something they missed, it's easily explainable. You know, this is something that's not allowed, and a mistake was made, and you don't have to keep making the same mistake because you made the mistake once.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah. Well, there is some.
Sorry, Bill. I was just going to say, I can't sit here and tell you if that would hold up in court.
Yeah.
Maybe you would be able to tell me better than that, but that's my opinion. You know, that they made a mistake, and just because they did it once doesn't mean you have to keep making that same mistake over and over.
Yeah. Well, we do have some language in the guidelines, and actually in the CC&Rs too, that suggests that you know, if you allowing one person to do something or waiving one requirement in the guidelines for one person does not set a precedent for anyone else. We're free to make those decisions every time. So we've got some coverage there.
Most guidelines have some language like that. And certainly I would recommend putting something like that in there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But you know, the ARC committees and decisions, and especially if a community is aged, and styles and tone and what's popular and what's not changes, that's stuff that's definitely going to come up over the years.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, Bill.
Erik, this is Judy Howland. I have actually 3 questions if you have time.
Sure, Judy.
Do the owners need to approve the guidelines, or can those just be approved by the board?
The answer is no. The owners don't need to approve the guidelines. I mean, too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Like, if you draft a document that's 15 pages long that talks about a bunch of details about what's okay and what's not as far as architectural review in your community, and you send that out to 120 homeowners, you're never going to get that document completed, right? Like you're never going to get everyone to agree on what those criteria need to be. So in my opinion, the board is elected by the owners, the ARC is appointed by the board, and those two groups together in conjunction with maybe a consultant who has experience in design review would be the best people to make a set of design guidelines, and then once they're completed, put them out to the owners saying, this is what we've come up with. And the design guidelines are a living document. You can change them and revise them, you know, really when things come up as it's needed, as long as you let everyone know what changes have been made and you get them the most updated set of documents. It's not like your governing documents, like your CCRs or your bylaws, which may have a threshold of 50 or 75% owner voting that needs to happen to change stuff in them. Now, you can't have your guidelines conflict with language in your CCRs. And you can't have your guidelines be looser in restrictions than your CCRs or your bylaws. So just a few things to keep in mind, but I would not involve an entire community in the drafting of the guidelines.
Okay. Second question, there's a lot of things in our community, a lot of sheds, for instance, went up that never went through the ARC process. Would we have a right to go to those owners and say that needs to come down?
That's a really good question. When those sheds, my question would be, when those sheds went up, was there a process that was clearly laid out for those owners to go through?
There was.
Okay.
A lot of what we were getting was, well, we didn't know there was an ARC process. We didn't know we were in a homeowners association. Some of them were renters that realistically didn't know. Good
So,
question.
yeah, a great question. I'd handle it carefully, with identification of where all those sheds are, communication to the owners that they were, if they have documents approving those sheds, they need to provide those. If they don't have documents approving those sheds, they're going to be under review by whatever process you have now, whatever committee you have now who's making these decisions. And then I would have them go see if any of them are approvable retroactively. Do any of them meet the intent and the design and the guidelines that were in place at that time or now? And if some of them are, you could do a approval for their records. So now they have that approval for that shed in their records and in the association records. And if some of them just like aren't even close, you would have the right to ask them to be removed. It's not, I guess, the board or the ARC's issue that owners live in your community and haven't decided to try and educate themselves about the rules in their HOA, or even that they live in an HOA. That's not really your fault. That's kind of on them. So a soft approach at first, informing everyone of what the issues are, that you're gonna re-review those sheds to see if any of them could be approved retroactively, and then a good plan about how the rest of them are going to be tackled.
Is that something the management company would do? Is address those owners that have done that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in coordination with, of course, the decision makers in the community. Yeah, and helping identify, all of the sheds in question, so some aren't missed. But yeah, drafting that communication and starting that ball rolling would be something your management company could help you with.
Okay.
Which is us.
Yes, it is. And then so it'd be the same process if somebody went through the ARC review process, got denied, and just said, I'm going to do it anyway, and put something up that got denied.
Yes, you would be fully within your rights to require them to take that down. In the case of non-compliance, they're I'm sure in your governing documents or your compliance enforcement policies, there's, you're probably going to put a lien on that house. And when a home eventually changes hands, that's when you can ensure that something like that can be taken care of. So if an owner just flat out refuses to take it down, you may have some punitive measures that you can take against that property, like a lien or a fine. If they just say, well, I'm just going to deal with that. Well, okay, you might not have a lot more as an HOA that you can do, but if that owner ever decides they want to sell their home, they're going to have a real problem, because the HOA is going to have a record. It is going to disclose in their disclosures that that shed is not in compliance and it has to be removed before the sale can happen.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I've got another question, just something that popped into my mind as you were discussing this. The issue of record keeping for architectural review committees. Going back to, committees change, people change, decisions are made. It's, future decisions have to be made. What kind of record keeping do you recommend for an architectural review committee?
Well, as a management company, and when we're administering reviews, I mean, we keep everything, every approval letter, every, saving emails that may be pertinent. But you're going to want to keep every piece of information from the submittal and every piece of correspondence that comes from the ARC to that owner on record somewhere. We use digital records. We have architectural lot files. So for every project, broken down by address, and when the submittals happened, that includes all of those records in there, along with approval or, denial letters. But again, like ARC is one of the things that is most likely going to get contentious because of the passion that people have for their homes and for improving them. So meticulous record keeping is highly recommended because you never know when you're gonna have to go back, sometimes years, like Judy was just saying. I mean, or the original homes in your development, Bill, like, does that paperwork exist somewhere that says that shed was approved or not approved, or that this home is completely approved as it is, and you might not have the ability to go back and require HVAC screening at that point. So
Yeah, we actually don't, because there are a lot of the plans for this homes in our development have been lost. We don't have the approved plans for them, and people raise questions and they say, well, that was approved, and we've got no way of knowing one way or the other whether that was on the original plans that were submitted and approved, and puts us in a really precarious position occasionally. So. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that helped or not, but yeah.
Well, no, it was pretty much what I was thinking, is that we need to be much better with our record keeping. And the other one is passing things on, because prior committee members or heads of the architecture review committees, they were storing things in their home and it didn't get passed on, or it ended up being missing. And
I mean, the older records are the most difficult, because if they're paper,
yeah,
like who knows, right? Like they could be in someone's garage, they could be in a storage unit somewhere.
Correct.
But yeah, that just be as meticulous as you possibly can.
Yeah, well,
I guess.
We're trying to document everything electronically now, with electronic plans as well as paper copies and
Right.
emails, exactly. and every project we're trying to create a file for, so that at least all of that stuff will go into one file, and we'll be able to research it if we need to in the future.
Perfect.
Thank you, Eric. Very informative.
Yeah, no problem, Judy. Are there any other questions?
Been very informative. I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. So again, sorry about the pauses there while I was trying to host and teach at the same time. But
yeah,
I appreciate everyone's time today, and thank you very, very much. And have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank you, Eric.
All right.
Thank you, Eric.
Take care.